Lately, there's been a Netflix British drama miniseries called Adolescence that's been stirring up a lot of attention on the internet. Some people have been praising it for storytelling, while others have been more critical of it for supposedly attacking men. Me personally, I couldn't be bothered to watch it at first, since it really didn't seem to be my cup of tea. But when I heard it had references to the PSL and Red Pill community, I knew I had to check it out. Roll the intro.
Yikes, Drake. Have you tried being confident?
So, I don't really know British shows all that well. The only ones I've seen are Doctor Who, Black Mirror, and The End of the Fucking World. Everything else I've seen of British television has been completely against my will, thanks to my dad, who got a BritBox subscription. Not sponsored. I know there are plenty of reviews of Adolescence out there from people already. Like I said, it stirred up a lot of attention. However, aside from the ABBA and Preach review of the show, there hasn't really been any analysis of the show from the eyes of someone who is affected by the Zoomer dating landscape of today, which is what I hope to accomplish in today's video. Before that, I want to apologize for not uploading anything in a hot minute. I know I say this like every other upload, but it's true. Life has gotten in the way, and I've been either studying or working. You gotta remember that editing, animating, all that fun stuff takes a lot of time and patience to do, and I can assure you some great stuff is on the way. In the meantime, I just wanted to quickly review this show, as I found it to be an entertaining yet flawed watch. Even if you have zero interest in watching the show yourself, as I bet many of my viewers don't want to see it, I promise I'll explain everything well enough that you get the basic premise of the show. I'll begin with a non-spoiler review at the beginning, and then go to spoilers afterward. I'll make sure to give everyone a clear warning when we get to that point in case you wanted to check it out yourself. So, I'll begin with non-spoilers. I like the way the show is set up and gets you to ask questions. I know that sounds like the bare minimum, and I agree, but so many shows fail to get you invested. However, with Adolescence, I feel like I have a stake in what's happening by virtue of simply watching. Why is Jamie, the subject of the show, suddenly being arrested and accused of murder? Throughout the 4 episodes, I found myself invested in each of the characters, even the minor ones that don't play a huge role. And I can't complain with how any of them are written. They all serve a purpose, and I never sat there wondering why a character was needed, since they were all integral to the story that was being told. What I did wonder was how I'd react if I was in the shoes of each of these characters. How would I react if I were Jamie during the interrogation? How would I react about solving the case if I were the police officers? How would I calm the class down and help, or not help, said police officers if I were a teacher at Jamie's school? What would I do if I was a psychologist assigned to Jamie? And what would I do if I was Jamie's parent or sibling? Hell, I was even wondering what I'd do in the shoes of Jamie's lawyer. And I think that's a sign of good storytelling. There's never a dull moment or time to breathe in the show, reminiscent of how a murder case should be. I also appreciate how each episode has a different feeling to them. They all have a bleak, suspenseful undertone to them. That's where the similarities end. The 4 episodes are all told from the eyes of different characters, so it's crucial that not every episode evokes the same feeling. For instance, the goal of Jamie's father may not necessarily be the same goal of Officer Bascombe. The show reflects that by making the viewers feel similarly aligned to the goals of said characters. Finally, I like how the story leaves you wanting more, as hackneyed as that saying is. There's something I expected the show to give us in detail, but never does, and I think it's all the better for that. I remember sitting there when the credits showed up, and I was like, is that it? But with this drama, less is more. What we're given is all we need to appreciate it. The more gaps you need to fill in, the more people are going to talk about it online. I can't believe people wanted a second season of it. Like, there's literally no reason to make a sequel. I'm hoping they don't touch the show, and the director himself says he has no plans for a second season. But hey, money talks, so who knows? They might ruin this somewhere down the line. Alright, so that's basically everything I had for non-spoilers, and we can really dig into the plot for those of you who have seen it or don't want to watch it. I'll explain everything in detail so that those who don't want to see it can still follow along and still find value in my criticisms, and I hope you stick around for that. So, the first episode starts with Jamie getting raided by the police and being interrogated for the murder of his fellow classmate Katie. We don't really know why the supposedly innocent kid Jamie would do such a thing, or even if he did it to begin with. Jamie vehemently denies murdering Katie, saying that he was out with his friends when Katie was killed. Jamie, his father, and Jamie's lawyer all sit in the interrogation room as he is being, well, interrogated, and they bring up Jamie's social media presence. They ask him why Katie was commenting emojis under his posts, and whether they had a romantic relationship. Jamie says he wasn't super close with Katie, and we don't really get much out of what their relationship was like. At the end, they say they have CCTV footage of what happened, and sure enough, we see footage of Jamie shanking Katie to death. The episode ends with Jamie's father distraught with his son, as prior to the interrogation, Jamie's dad asked him to look him in the eyes and promised him he didn't commit the crime. I found that to be a point which really resonated with me. If you were in Jamie's position, what would you do? I definitely would have denied it to my father, even if I knew what was coming would break that illusion. So that wraps up episode 1. Episode 2 follows D.I. Bascombe and his sidekick, D.S. Misha Frank. Sorry, I had to look that up. Anyways, both of them have a mission to investigate the murder further, so they go to Jamie's school. Funny enough, D.I. Bascombe's son goes to the same school, and you see him getting bullied by some kid. Furthermore, you also get to see Jamie's friends. And you're asking yourself, what role did Jamie's friends play in the murder? As Bascombe and Frank ask around as well, we get to see Katie's friend Jade deal with the loss. Of course, she isn't taking it too well. I mean, if my best friend was murdered, I wouldn't exactly be sunshine and rainbows either. When Jade is interrogated by the officers, she mentions Jamie and Katie weren't really friends. And I think this is a very realistic dynamic. A lot of the times when I'm interested with a girl, I don't really get a chance to be their friends in the first place. I know a lot of other guys know what I'm talking about. Often you're stuck in this weird situation where you really aren't buddy-buddy with someone you're interested in. And when they eventually reject you, you just go back to seeing them in your classes or whatever, but there's no explicit hostility. Rather, there's this tension or awkwardness. But at this point in the story, how Jamie and Katie were really connected is still up in the air. There are a few scenes of all the kids memeing Katie's death, or just being insensitive, but then the fire alarm is pulled. Following the chaos that ensues, D.I. Bascombe's son pulls him aside and tries to help his father with the case. Now, it's pretty obvious what they're going for. This kid's supposed to be a Jamie in the making, maybe not a cold-blooded killer, but at the very least, a future manosphere consumer or whatever. And if you're sick of me glazing this show, thank you for patiently waiting, because here's where some criticisms start to emerge. Adam, Bascombe's son, explains what the emojis in Katie's comments to Jamie actually mean. Basically, the emojis stand for red pill jargon, and this is her way of taunting Jamie. First of all, who the fuck writes like this? I'm not really in the red pill space myself, so maybe these are things they really say, but even if we suspend our disbelief here, why on earth is a 13-year-old girl talking about this stuff? Literally no girl, let alone a teenage one, is writing this way unironically. Maybe the ones that are kind of in this space, like the lawyer that, roasted wheat waffles on that one stream I covered all the way back in September, writes this way, but I don't see a teenage girl writing this way. And to add to that, Adam refers to the 80-20 rule, which I'm pretty sure people in the PSL space are more familiar with. Again, I don't know if red pillers believe in that, but it's definitely more of a PSL thing than a Tate/Sneeko thing. To me, this scene is unforgivable in terms of accuracy. I just can't believe any teenage girl is writing this way to a boy on Instagram. You know that one meme of millennials trying to poorly write how kids speak and act in shows? This is a great example of that. Maybe if it was another boy saying this to Jamie, maybe it would work. Might be willing to bet women have their own way of cyberbullying that doesn't sound remotely close to this at all. Bascombe takes this to D.S. Frank, and they have a discussion about, ooh, the evil Inkies. And then they name drop Andrew Tate, which is hilarious to me, because no one in the looks maxing/PSL space fucks with Tate, I can tell you that much. Because the black and red pills mix like water and oil. Maybe this is actually a 300 IQ nuanced line, where the writers thought that by having D.S. Frank throw them together, it shows how out of touch she is, and I'm the idiot for not seeing that. But really, I think it's just the writers not being able to tell the difference themselves. If any of my subscribers were to proofread this beforehand, or even one of those numbskulls on the looksmaxing forums, I guarantee this could have been a much more realistic watch. And yeah, there wasn't really anything else I wanted to discuss in this episode. I guess one of Jamie's friends, I don't remember his name, gets arrested, and whoa, he supplied the knife that Jamie used on Katie. After a chase, they arraign him, and that's the last we see of that chud. At the end of this episode, we see D.I. Bascombe and his son Adam talk in the car, and Bascombe decides to grab food with him. This is meant to be character development and also a chance for the parents and the audience to take notes from it if it wasn't obvious enough. I'll touch on this later, so just keep this scene in mind for the end of the video. Alright, episode 3 begins with a woman entering the facility here where Jamie is being held. We soon learn that this is a child psychologist here to interview Jamie, and she enters the room with Jamie, offering him a pickle sandwich. Now, I've watched a few analysis videos on this, which mention that Jamie eating the sandwich later is a sign that his innocence has been stripped away, and that he has now entered adulthood due to the savage nature of his crime, which is neat. I guess I appreciate the detail as someone who enjoys symbolism in stories. Not much I can add.
I mean, it's alright, like...
But anyways, the psychologist walks in, bringing hot chocolate as well as the aforementioned pickle sandwich. Now, the same video that told me that the dill pickle sandwich is supposed to represent the loss of innocence also told me that the hot chocolate purposely has marshmallows in it in an effort to try to coerce Jamie into giving her what she wants, which is whether or not he is mentally fit to stand trial. For me, this is the most realistic scene in the show. Guys, you gotta remember, healthcare specialists are not your friends. As someone who has a job in healthcare, and a low effort one at that, you should hear the things they say about you when you're not there. It's just like any other job. and their goal is to do their job well, without your interest in mind. But back to the main focus, the psychologist starts grilling Jamie about his upbringing and how it was like, and Jamie says that his father never really had a violent relationship with his son. He mentions how his father tended to look away when he messed up and uses soccer as an example of this. The psychologist then presses further, causing Jamie to snap in a violent fit of rage, knocking over the hot chocolate. This reflects how affected Jamie is by all this manosphere content he has supposedly consumed, and how he channels that rage in such a violent way. After he calms down, the psychologist starts discussing Katie, and we then get a back and forth revealing more insight onto Jamie's worldview of women. We learn that topless images of Katie were being spread throughout the school, and Jamie decided to ask Katie out at her lowest, but the fact that she was disgusted by him, even then, was what pushed him over the edge to stab her. Jamie explains that the reason he feels he cannot get a girlfriend is because he's ugly. This is obviously supposed to be a jab at the PSL community, and the whole rhetoric of men in this space thinking they are inadequate due to physical characteristics. Again, this is where I have gripes with the show. They want us to believe this narrative that these online spaces are the reason why younger guys think that they're all ugly. In reality, it's life telling us through our day-to-day interactions. I mean, I've seen women have knee-jerk reactions to me, whether it be in class, at the club, at work, wherever. Just because they don't tell you that directly doesn't mean you can't put the pieces together and deduce that. I know just based on my life experiences that I'm never going to be the hot guy that all the girls thirst over or think about in their dreams. That's just life. But the show implies that this is all in our heads, and we're the ones that fall for thinking this way. And they decide to cast some average looking white kid to further prove this to us. I dare them. I triple dog dare them to cast some ethnic kid who is truly below average to play the role of Jamie, because then we could have at least gotten some commentary on how race plays a role in attraction. But of course, this is the mainstream media, so we can't expect too much from them. But aside from that, I can see why people may say stabbing someone is a very extreme action for a very simple rejection. But honestly, from my experience, I've seen guys get so irate and start foaming at the mouth over the smallest rejections in a similar manner. For instance, I had a buddy of mine, Drew, obsess over this girl last spring, and eventually, when she rejected him, he was still coping and seething. He kept microanalyzing every small thing, like, oh, did she look at my Instagram story? And he kept trying to follow her around campus. Now this pissed me off, like it really pissed me the fuck off. Eventually I just tried to get him to move on, which he said he did, but he still wouldn't shut up about it. Now I'm not immune to this myself. Thankfully I'm mature enough not to, stalk people around campus. But I remember when I got rejected by my first one-itis in middle school, it felt like the end of the world. I couldn't sleep for like a week after that. Now mind you, this was 7 years ago and I was 13 years old, and eventually you learn how to brush it off. Like after rejection number 15, I kinda got used to it and it stopped hurting as much. Anyway, back to Jamie. The story conveys that this latent anger towards women and his need for approval stems from the manosphere content he's implied to watch. But honestly, I don't think that's the case. When I finally discovered the pill of the black variety, let's put it that way, I wasn't filled with rage. Instead, I felt a sense of calm, knowing that a large portion of my relationship problems were outside of my control. I understand why the media might look at PSL forums online and come to the conclusion that we're all nutcases, but if you can get past the edgy rhetoric of those sites, you can see how it's actually helped a lot of people cope. And to be honest with you, I don't even think the majority of those guys on the forums and the ones in the Looksmacks community are even fully BP'd. They usually stick around just long enough to say the most offensive stuff possible behind the anonymity of the internet, and then eventually disappear to become beta buxes when the first woman they see gives them a lick of attention. The episode ends with the psychologist saying goodbye to Jamie, informing him that this is their last session together, as she concluded that he is fit to stand trial. Jamie is then led away by a guard, and we then see the psychologist break down in fear. Like I said, I work in healthcare, and there's so many times when I see a patient who's just terrifying or mentally disturbed to the point of giving you nightmares. You have to hold it together and just do your job. The slow reveal to her crying is phenomenal in my opinion. You think she's in control for the majority of the episode, but the mask of professionalism slips as soon as he is led away. It's definitely my favorite performance in the show, and Aaron Doherty really kills it. I also appreciate how the episode is all shot in one take, similar to the episode of Ryan Murphy's Menendez Brothers show where they speak to their lawyer. Anyways, on to the fourth and final episode. This is my favorite of the 4 episodes, and it follows Jamie's family a year after his arrest. At first, I didn't notice the time skip, and I initially thought this was a flashback to before the stabbing, but the van outside vandalized shows the aftermath and the mental burden Jamie's family is put through after the incident. Due to the van being vandalized, Jamie's dad decides to spend the morning of his birthday. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, it's his father's birthday, getting paint to cover the spray paint on his van. Jamie's dad, Jamie's mom, and Jamie's sister all get into the van, and they go into the hardware store. On the way, there's a bit of nostalgic banter between Jamie's parents, talking about how Jamie's dad made a fool of himself in school, but even then, everything worked out and he was still able to pull Jamie's mom. I think you can take this two ways. One, everything eventually works out in the end, and Jamie should have just waited for his teenage angst to pass by. Or two, but because dating was easier back then, he was able to come out on top. I prefer the second interpretation a bit more, and I think it was Gilbert Johnson who mentioned this in a video of his, where he asked his viewers whether their fathers would survive the current dating market. This is a great question, one I still think about. I mean, do you think your dad would have been able to have a kid if he was put through the ringer today? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, the family arrives at the hardware store, and Jamie's dad gets some help from an employee on what paint to get. The young employee then recognizes Jamie's dad, and at first you're led to think the dude's gonna rip into Jamie's dad, but no. He actually supports what Jamie did, and even says that he's willing to raise funds for Jamie's legal endeavors. I think this dude is a good stand-in for all the inkwells and femcels who think people like Richard Ramirez, Elliot Rodger, or even more recent cases like Samantha Rupnow are actually based. This could also be a meta-commentary on people who watch American Psycho, The Boys, hell, even this show, Adolescence, and they're like, oh, based character, even though that completely goes against the point of the show. Jamie's dad is somewhat creeped out by the dude, so he gets his paint and then leaves the store. He then sees two teenagers laughing at him on their bikes, and a small foot chase ensues. Jamie's dad then interrogates one of the boys after catching up to him. It turns out that they were the ones who spray painted his van. Jamie's dad throws one of their bikes after they run away, and then in a fit of anger, hastily dumps the paint he bought all over the van and drives off, with the security guards at the store yelling at him to come back and clean up his mess. When they drive back home, Jamie's dad gets a call from Jamie, who says he has been thinking about his actions and decides to plead guilty, much to the dismay of his family. After the call, Jamie and his parents hold it together just a second longer until they are in their room. Jamie's dad and his mom have a discussion on how they could have avoided Jamie doing what he did, and Jamie's mom then begins to ask his dad questions on whether they could have intervened when Jamie spent hours online, presumably consuming Manosphere content alone. There's a line I really like where the parents are talking, and his father asks, how did we make her? Referring to Jamie's sister. And then the mother responds with, in the same way we made him, showing how a good part of Jamie's actions were fueled purely by chance and a flurry of things outside of either parent's control. And the episode ends with Jamie's father going into his son's empty room, still untouched from the morning of his arrest. Jamie's father speaks to the teddy bear on his son's bed, crying and saying he should have done better before the final episode draws to a close. Alright, that's the summary of the 4 episodes. Now we can talk about it a bit. I know the vast majority of comments I will get are either going to be from people saying, oh, this is low IQ propaganda and I didn't watch it, or normies saying, oh, you didn't get the complexity of the show. So I'm not really sure who I'm making this video for, but for the very, very small minority of people who are in the PSL space and either gave the show a chance or are willing to listen to me talk about it, I think you'll agree with what I have to say. Remember that thing I said at the beginning of the video they never really show in detail? Well, what I thought they would show is a flashback leading up to the stabbing of Katie, maybe some dialogue or something like that. We actually never get anything. We do not actually get to see or hear Katie at all, and I think that works excellently. I always like shows that don't give us more than we need. We don't need a segment of the dialogue between Katie and Jamie. You don't need to know any of that to appreciate the plot. I think leaving that out, along with what exactly influenced Jamie, is great. To avoid any legal problems, they could have just had a bald cope or manosphere guy regurgitating some red-pilled masculine guru lines that some kid at school could have been watching on his phone during the whole school episode, but they opted not to, leaving that up to the viewers' imaginations. Speaking of which, throughout the show, the theme of masculinity is brought up, which obviously is a central part of the plot. Masculinity has kind of become a buzzword nowadays, with people using it constantly as a blanket term. Oh, toxic masculinity this, we need more masculine roles, blah blah blah. You see countless videos on masculinity plastered all over YouTube. I was watching a video regarding masculinity and the show since it was recommended to me, and I wanted to get a better grasp of how the word is used on the internet. When I started scrolling through the comments, there were plenty of inkwells in denial, the type of guys who aren't really any more successful with women than we are. But I think it's interesting how a lot of them say that they were negatively influenced by online spaces like this. On top of that, another interesting common denominator is how all their comments mention being forced to bottle up their emotions. And I think this is a really common scapegoat I see a lot of people put out there in regards to why men are always so mad, so lonely, and to an extent, I kind of agree. Like, if I complain about my problems to people in real life, I fear that they'll sense that as weakness and think less of me, which is why I've opted to just complain semi-anonymously online. But the thing is, even if I showed my emotions, it wouldn't really help me get into a relationship or help me fit in with others. Something I noticed with blue pillars is that they love to beat around the bush. If you tell them you can't find a girlfriend, they'll say, oh, focus on yourself. Oh, relationships aren't everything. Oh, you gotta love yourself, or some other BS. I find it somewhat ironic that the show tries to get its viewers to discuss these problems head on, but the conclusion those viewers have is to just wallow in self-love instead. The story tries to leave the main cause of Jamie's actions to be open-ended, implying that it is due to multiple influences working in tandem. However, a sizable portion of that blame is attributed to fatherhood, implying that his father could have done things differently to circumvent this problem. I agree that parenting plays a massive role in how children behave, and having good role models can shape them for the better. That being said, I don't know if fatherhood played a significant role in what Jamie ultimately did. I know a lot of people in the PSL community have gripes with their parents, and some even resent them, but you have to ask yourself, even if they had been perfect, completely supporting parents, would those kids still suffer when it comes to interpersonal relationships with their peers, specifically with the opposite gender? Like I said, the show does imply that there were more factors leading up to Jamie's crime during the dialogue with his mother and father, but I don't think parenting is a large factor in this, let alone the biggest factor. I think this is more of a show meant to reach friends or parents of isolated young men rather than the young men themselves. The show is targeted at a mainstream audience and is outright saying Manosphere and its ideologies are wrong. And the thing is, it's not socially acceptable to come out and say a lot of rejection is just due to not meeting the requirements of the other party, whether it's looks, status, or whatever. There are hints of this, such as when Jamie's dad is reminiscing with his wife, Jamie's mom, about how he made a fool of himself in school and was still able to get into a relationship with her, implying that perhaps the dating landscape is not as friendly as it once was. But even then, I think the show doesn't really address the underlying issue, which is that people today are playing a far harder game when it comes to getting into a relationship or making friends. Bullying and rejection were always a thing, but it's definitely harder today for Gen Z and Gen Alpha when it comes to dating and making relationships. I still think that the main issue is that when online dating was added to the mix, things just got way harder for the average guy. The internet as a whole has caused us to become somewhat less connected with one another, as cliche as the whole grr social media bad platitude is. Most couples now meet online, and it's becoming more difficult to get a girlfriend through traditional means, such as school, work, or really anything IRL. And to women watching this, you can't tell me you don't feel the mog either. You hop onto TikTok or Instagram and get flooded with attractive female models, and you're wondering suddenly why you even decided to turn your phone on in the first place. Combine that with the fact that beta boxing is becoming harder than it was 100 years ago, and it means that it's become easier for women to become more selective with their partner choice. But of course, it would be much easier for the show to just blame the root cause of male loneliness. God, I hate that term, it's so cringe. On the lack of poor male figures in children's lives. And of course, I'm not saying that isn't a problem, but it isn't the main driving force behind a more difficult dating landscape. The problem is, we can't have a show where D.I. Bascom and Jamie's dad team up to raid Tinder HQ, or suddenly enact a state law where people have to date their looks match or something. So instead they go the cop-out route of blaming the fathers for masculinity and just call it a day. It's much easier to write in a scene where Bascom takes his son out to eat, but here's the thing. It's not going to stop Adam from being rejected by girls or stop him from getting bullied. I remember complaining to my parents about not having friends, or more recently, not having a relationship. But the thing is, what can they really do, you know? It's not really their fault, and it's not like they can magically find friends for me. I know people love to meme the whole South Asians get arranged marriages thing, but realistically, that's really a last resort for people in my community that live in the West. I know I'll get flamed to high heaven by people outside of the PSL and Looks Maxing space for saying this, since the show is only getting praised by everyone else. This could easily turn into another case of Synthetic Man reviewing Spider-Man 2, but for me, this is really just a case of the Emperor's New Clothes, where someone has to say it. Focusing on parenting is only a small fraction of the problem. The main underlying issue is that Gen Z and Gen Alpha kids can't bond with one another. This is mainly an intragenerational issue rather than an intergenerational one. Overall, as a drama show, Adolescence works quite well. It has an interesting premise, and I can't complain with how high production it looks. If you like semi-grounded, keyword semi, shows that are character-driven, you'll like Adolescence. I thought the show was, okay. Not some masterpiece like the people of YouTube are saying, but the main message is one that I don't think really addresses the issue, nor do I ever think we'll get a show that does. I give the show a 5 out of 10. If you think the show is deep, then you're probably the same person who thought Kishibe from Chainsaw Man, writing Makima is Listening, on a notepad was scary back in 2022. Saying that adolescence is an accurate representation of the male situation today is like saying House MD is an accurate representation of a hospital. I know I'm not a teenager anymore, so maybe things are different for kids 10 years younger than me, but I still feel like this misses the mark when it comes to understanding how difficult it is for younger kids just trying to connect with their peers. Because that's what the main issue is. Kids keep getting rejected by their peers. None of this parenting stuff, that's just all being around the bush. It's not that boys can't handle rejection. It's just that rejection rates have skyrocketed. I think that there are a number of other ways to explore the isolation younger men feel. One such way could be looking at the body dysmorphia and unrealistic standards guys are meant to go through now. I know that there was a Channel 4 documentary on this back in October, where they interviewed a guy on the looks maxing forums. Actually a pretty popular guy. I'm not going to say who it was, but my point is, as much as people were clowning on the documentary, at least it did a better job at capturing the struggle of the social reject, without the need for all these comically fabricated ways writing online. I'm sorry, maybe I'm too hung up on the Instagram part of the show, but to be fair, it did play a huge part in the overall plot. So I'm not sorry for calling out the sheer absurdity of it. But hey, if this show serves as the impetus for a parent to connect with their child more, or if it stops a kid from hurting someone else, I guess that's a win. But yeah, that's all I had for this video. I promise the next video will be higher effort. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you with the next one.
This is a certified PSL classic.